We have a real problem in this country, a problem that is fundamental to why so much of the political analysis is incorrect and incoherent. This problem is not distinct to one political party, to Democrats, Republicans, liberals, or conservatives. This is the problem of how we are taught and conditioned to view history. From an early age, we're taught to think of history as a successive series of events that are separate and distinct from one another. Rather, we must look at history as a process of social development and social relations that are constantly unfolding. And this approach allows us to more fully understand the events of the past and also have the power to create and shape the future. One of the works that helped me open my eyes to this dialectical and evolutionary view of history was Black Reconstruction by W.E.B. Du Bois, which gives us an important insight into some of the most seminal events of U.S. history, the Civil War and Reconstruction. But in this seminal work, it helps us understand that the destabilization of the Union and the contradictions brought about by slavery were part of an objective economic and political process. The aristocratic class and slaveocracy of the South could no longer recreate their class and their system of slavery within the prevailing political and economic conditions for the Union, which were industrializing and no longer dependent on slave agricultural labor, but dependent on the factory workers in the North, and controlled more and more by the industrialists who were also building political control. As the country expanded and new industries were being developed, many parts of the political system and the political class did not prefer the slave economies of the South. Actually, a small minority of citizens in the North, even on the eve of the Civil War, that were actual abolitionists, although abolitionists did play an important role in exerting political pressure. The predominant rallying cry to get the worker in the North to join the Union Army was not to end slavery, but to preserve the Union. And in the South, something similar was occurring, where poor Southerners who did not own slaves had to be appealed to by the slaveocracy to preserve their customs and appealing to their status above the black slave. And ultimately, the war proved that the objective inferiority of the slave economy was a reality, and the system of the slaveocracy was incompatible with modern economies and the productive forces that the North marshaled for victory. And the immorality of the slave economy was fully recognized only through this process. Another important area where we must apply the dialectical evaluation of history is in the development of communism and communist parties in the Soviet Union and the East. The Soviet Union and communism are viewed in American history as a specific period of time that ended with the fall of communism, as Francis Fukuyama famously declared, the end of history and triumph of liberal capitalism. Now, I'll plug another book that I think can help us understand and situate communism within its proper historical context, and that is The Communist Postscript by Boris Groys. This is a great book that everyone should pick up. It helps us understand that the context of the Soviet Union was capitalism, and that the next step in the realization of communism had to be the transition from capitalism to communism. Countries like Russia and China had to constitute a socialist future within the prevailing realities of capitalism, which they have now done in large part. Socialist revolutions in the Soviet Union and China helped build the foundation economically and socially for a future for communism. And in China, even through the process of opening up, China's Communist Party still had control of the reins. And today, Russia and China are now on their feet and are vying for real geopolitical power to challenge the West for the first time in decades, precisely due to the development of communist and socialist frameworks in decades prior. This has caused many in the West to be beside themselves as to how this could have happened, particularly as China socializes the gains from decades of capitalist development to create a system that is now outpacing the West in key areas of development and research, from medicine to housing to the development of transportation infrastructure. And most Chinese, in contrast to Americans, look hopefully toward the future. And that brings us to America, where the outlook among the population is much more bleak, mirroring the increased economic stress of the masses, social alienation, as the sale of communities to conglomerates continues to accelerate, and we're even seeing things as basic as a reduction in life expectancy. And so with this dialectical approach to history, we also have to view the prevailing political trends in the United States through the dialectical evaluation of history. And this applies to the example of Trump and the MAGA movement as well, where the deindustrialization of America has led to widespread political dissatisfaction and the reemergence of reactionary ideas that are perpetuated not out of some organic racism that is held by the masses of the working class, but that is consciously perpetuated in order to preserve the status quo and cover the contradictions created in this late capitalist society. The Trump phenomenon is a great example of this, and we've seen that Trump has taken advantage of this movement by correctly identifying many of the problems, but often giving heinous solutions. But that doesn't change the fact that among the MAGA rank and file, there's a recognition that something is fundamentally not right, and something has to be done. And to the extent that Trump is successful and has been able to garner a political movement, has been in large part due to his ability to give a voice to these concerns, to these desires of the working class in America that has been so left behind. We've even seen things as strange as Trump referencing Mao in talking about the drug crisis in the United States, which is more evidence that the problems have become so profound that even figures like Donald Trump have been compelled to reference communist history, the history of Mao, however vaguely. And in his comments, he gave Mao credit for addressing the drug problem that had been rampant in China before the Communist Revolution, where over 1/3 of the population in Shanghai had been drug addicts. But in the span of a decade, the Chinese Communist Party largely eradicated drug addiction. So now we're seeing threads where we can connect the experiences of the American working class to revolutions of the past, and we cannot be dogmatic about how we do that. We have to be able to take advantage of every opportunity and recognize where the soil is the most fertile for revolutionary ideas and the principles and real movement of revolutionary force and ultimately communism. So instead of the blanket rejection of MAGA that we've seen so commonly on the left, we need to be able to look at MAGA as an opportunity to shape and give fuller meaning to the problems Americans are experiencing and correctly situate them in the historical context using dialectics. And we should seize on these opportunities, particularly in areas like the Rust Belt or rural America, where the rural working classes are experiencing some of the contradictions of capitalism that are the most acute, where we can plant revolutionary seeds and do things like continue to inspire the curiosity around successful political movements, like in the Soviet Union, like with the Bolsheviks, like with the Chinese Revolution, and fundamentally new geopolitical relations with countries like Russia and China and North Korea. Now, this doesn't mean that we are tailing reactionary ideas. This simply means that we are taking advantage of the revolutionary potential that is latent within the American working classes. And this also leads us to view our fellow man with more understanding, open-mindedness, and creativity. So let's move toward a revolutionary future optimistically, and it begins with a dialectical view of history.